Howdy Summoners, and welcome to another episode of ProGuides Best Champions to Main, now on patch 11.9. The champs we pick for this series are strong picks with high performance, but have low ban rates, and are unlikely to be nerfed anytime soon. They're reliable picks for climbing, and are worth investing your precious time into. We also have a series that covers the most broken contested picks in each role, so be sure you're subbed to the channel so you don't miss out when we post those as well. Without further ado, let's hop right in. We'll be starting things out in the top lane with the newly buffed Shen. Shen has already been a pretty solid A tier pick for a while. His ult can be a huge game changer, allowing you to split push against an opponent and join your team for a forced 5v4 on the other side of the map. But since the ult is so incredibly powerful, it's balanced by having a super long cooldown. With such a long cooldown, you only really get to use Shen ult a few times in each game, so when the ally you target with your ult is bursted down right before you complete the channel, it can feel pretty dang bad. This buff helps to let your shield go quite a bit further, which will be especially helpful in those later game fights where bruisers diving in are a bit easier for your opponents to burst down. Ult aside, Shen is also a super strong pick on his own, able to use his passive shield, empowered auto attacks from Q, and defensive zone from W to outtrade pretty much any laner you can land your taunt on. To beat AD bruisers and juggernauts, be sure you're building a bramble vest early on in the lane before you start building towards completed items. In the event you end up laning against an AP champion, you can build an early Spectre's Cowl, and instead of Thornmail 3rd, opt for a Wit's End for better dueling in the side lane. While Shen is a really good champ when played properly, he also doesn't feel ridiculously oppressive to play against. More than anything, he's just a very solid pick that gives your team more macro opportunities due to his ability to split push and still join the team at a moment's notice. And that brings us to today's question of the day. What champs do you think are super well balanced? Like Shen, we're looking for champs that are great picks, but don't feel frustrating and totally anti-fun to play against. You know, that has some kind of semblance of counterplay. Let us know your answers down in the comments below. Our next top lane pick is Wukong. With most of the top lane meta being so heavily skewed towards AD damage threats, his passive makes him a great pick into pretty much any matchup you'll run into in solo queue. But it's not like he's just good against those AD champs. The armor shred on his Q and damage based on the target's max HP on his ult make him an amazing anti-pick as well. When going against a tank, you'll want to swap out Triforce for Divine Sunderer and pick up Blade of the Ruined King and Black Cleaver after Ravenous Hydra. When trading with Wukong, your main goal is to fight as long as you can to stack up your passive. That armor and HP regen may not seem like a ton, but it really adds up once you max those stacks out, and it can even give you the upper hand against otherwise oppressive laners, to the point that Wukong is one of the few champs that can win all-in fights against a Darius. You'll generally start trades off by using your E to gap close onto the target, and depending on the matchup, you can use W to chase further, dodge a crucial ability, or just dip out when it's a bit too risky to chase even more. After laning, you're an incredibly strong split pusher, so be sure to pressure side lanes over randomly ARAMing with your team. That said, you'll also want to be sure you're grouping up at the right times when your team is ready to fight a dragon or a baron, for example. Our last top laner is Riven. Riven is one of, if not the most, difficult champs in the game to completely master, but once you get each of her mechanically intensive combos and animation cancels down, you can play her into pretty much every matchup, using her dashes and shield to outplay and outtrade every opponent, game after game. One thing about mastering Riven is that it's not enough to just go into practice tool and grind away to learn those tough combos. You have to learn how to play every matchup with her. Against some champs, you may need to go for short, bursty trades, using your last dash to run away before they trade back, while in others, you can go for more committed fights. While some all-ins may be as mindless as using everything you can to kill your opponent, against some champs, you may have to use your E to dodge a crucial skill shot. Once you get these trading patterns down, you'll be able to play every lane and at least go even, if not completely outplay your opponent, even when the matchup should be favored towards them. While most other melee carries like Jax and Fiora are easily kiteable in 5v5s and are limited to being played as split pushers, the huge amount of mobility Riven has makes her great even in team fights, able to dodge away from incoming CC and jump into the enemy back line. Once you have 2 or more items, you can even flash one-shot squishy ADCs and mages in the enemy backline if you're able to combo quickly enough. One thing to note about our build, Essence Reaver works best when you're so good at her that you can really utilize her passive, weaving in autos between each Q, but honestly that's pretty hard to do. So with that being said, when you're learning her, you'll probably want to pick up Black Cleaver, with the Armor Shred passive giving you much more value than the Spell Blade on Essence Reaver. Once you've gotten used to weaving in autos though, you can make the swap to the better item. Taking things into the jungle, our first pick is Rek'Sai. With the mindless speed demon meta taking a hit, all other playstyles in the jungle will be getting a bit of an indirect buff. If you're looking for a strong early game pick with the ability to gank lanes over and over again, Rek'Sai is the pick for you. While it can be tempting to go for a full clear with her ability to take down camps relatively quickly, you'll opt to get level 3 and start ganking right away, taking advantage of the ability to tunnel over walls to gank any overextended opponent you can. Your early game damage is pretty high, but 1v1s aren't really something you should be looking for unless you're guaranteed to get the jump on your opponent by camping in a bush or tunneling over a wall onto them as they're clearing a camp you've warded. The more consistent playstyle is to gank lanes and counter jungle away camps, avoiding direct fights with the enemy jungler. Once you have your ult though, you can start threatening tower dives, using the untarget ability to drop tower aggro and finish off your opponent. Do this as soon as you can, as often as you can, and tilt your opponents right into the Milky Way. Our second jungle pick is Xin. Like Rek'Sai, Xin has a lot of early pressure, but the champs definitely have their differences. While Rek'Sai has a faster clear, the ability to tunnel through terrain, and strong tower dives, Xin has quite a few advantages going his way. First, he's one of the few junglers that can pretty frequently pull off a level 2 gank, with EQ being enough to net kills on overextended targets. He's also more capable of dueling the opposing jungler, being much harder to kite with his point-and-click dash reaching up to 1100 units once you tag with your W. And while he may not be able to dodge turret shots, his ult makes him a much better team fighter than Rek'Sai. So, with his clear speed being relatively low compared to other meta picks, you'll pretty much want to exclusively stick to ganking. I'm not saying to never clear camps, but if you're not tilting at least one enemy laner with your non-stop visits, you're doing something wrong. In teamfights, you'll play almost like Camille, isolating a target and killing them before their team can help. To do that, you'll need to land your W on the target, dash onto them with E, and use your ult to sweep their entire team away. It's important that you do this without using flash, so you'll still have it to flash onto them if they use their own to try and escape. One extra note for teamfighting, your ult makes you invulnerable to damage from those outside of the circle, but not untargetable. So you're still susceptible to CC like Ashe arrows and hooks that may hit you from outside the circle. So don't just charge in thinking you're an unstoppable force. Our last jungler is more of a farm-heavy, play-for-ult type of champ in Nocturne. While he may not have much influence in the very early stages of the game, once you hit 6, the threat of being ulted puts constant pressure on the enemy laners anytime you have it up. For the early stages of the game, you'll want to focus on getting as much experience as you can, as fast as you can, to get your ult as soon as you can. With that in mind, look to full clear and play for guaranteed scuttles. None of that 50-50 stuff where you blame your mid laner for not moving fast enough. Nocturne's early game weakness doesn't come from a lack of damage. In fact, he's one of the best duelists in the game, having high damage, healing, and a fear. But it's pretty hard to get onto targets, which is why you'll avoid forcing fights too hard. That said, if you have a lane with hard CC and your opponents are overextending, don't pass up a free kill. You can even stick around after to help your laner shove in the wave, aka tax their lane to get more experience for yourself. Nocturne is the type of champ where you want to use his ult the second it's up if you can. It has a relatively long cooldown, so be sure you're abusing flashless opponents as much as you can with it to net guaranteed kills. Once you get out of the early game, you'll want to use your ult to constantly make picks on opponents that are farming alone in a side lane or making a rotation by themselves through their jungle. It helps a lot to buy a blue trinket over the standard Oracle lens that most junglers opt for, since you can use it to spot out targets where you wouldn't otherwise have vision. Regardless of your pick, junglers are the key to controlling the pace of the game. From ganking and pressuring lanes, establishing vision control, and taking Rift Heralds and Dragons, you largely dictate how things go from this role. Whether you pick a more scaling champ like Nocturne or a turbo ganker like Rek'Sai, you want to make sure you're making the most efficient pathing choices, clearing the right camps, and ganking the right lanes at the right time to get the best results. Struggling to do it right will very often lead to the all-too-common jungle diff in all chat as your nexus explodes. Thankfully, we've got you covered. Here at ProGuides, our top-tier coaches are always available to help you with everything you need. So head on over to the site and book a session today so you can waste less time being flamed and spend more time climbing the ladder. Now for some mid laners, we'll start off with Echo. When it comes to assassins, Echo isn't as overbearing as picks like Talon and Katarina, who can easily solo kill inexperienced mid laners as early as level 2 or 3. His strength lies elsewhere in his ability to constantly clear waves, removing the ability for your opponent to interact much in the lane. While this may seem counterintuitive for assassins, who tend to need a snowball to do well, Echo doesn't fall under that umbrella. He's perfectly fine playing the Malzahar game, existing to be a wave clear bot until you complete your core build. While this may sound like it's not the most exciting thing ever, because it isn't, it will get consistent results and allow you to win or at least go even in just about any matchup. Once you do have Rocket Belt, Sork Shoes, and Lich Bane, you can be a lot more aggressive, with your full combo giving you enough damage to bring down squishy backline carries and supports in teamfights. As far as items go, we have Zhonya's pretty late in our build, but if you need it earlier to deal with chain CC from point-and-click champs like Vi or Annie, you can do so. Or if you don't need it at all against certain comps, you can opt for a more aggressive item. Nashor's Tooth is particularly good when you need DPS to bring down tankier targets. Our second mid laner is Ahri. She's somewhere in between being a mage and an assassin, having the mobility and burst damage to one-shot squishy targets, but also being able to play a slower game, kiting out threats and using her combos to whittle down even the tankiest opponents thanks to her true damage on her Q. In lane, she has pretty strong pushing power due to the Q's ability to hit every minion, but it can get pretty costly before you have Lost Chapter. So, instead of wasting mana on constantly shoving the wave, you should be looking to throw out Qs that will poke your lane opponent. Bonus points if you can hit them with both passes of the ability. Once you chip them down with a few Qs, wait for the chance to all in. Even without your ult, a Charm Flash combo can easily help you net a freebie. Once you have your ult, a lot more opportunities for aggression open up. When you're fed, you definitely have strong kill pressure on your own, but you're not too likely to be that strong early game. Instead, look to work with your jungler, either to kill your lane opponent or skirmish the enemy jungler, or opt for a roam to a side lane, showing up for a surprise visit on overextended opponents. Vision control can be huge for your success in the mid and late stages of the game, giving you the ability to pick opponents that wander into the jungle in an attempt to put some wards of their own down. Constantly look for picks like this, and your opponent will always be playing off the back foot. Our last pick for mid is Victor, a hyper-scaling pick for those of you who prefer to carry team fights hard. It's pretty self-explanatory, but when you're playing to scale, your main focus is farming, and guess what? Yeah, more farming until you reach your power spike. Even if you get an early lead, you won't snowball on Victor the same way a champ like Annie or Syndra may. Victor is very reliant on reaching Ludens and Lich Bane, as well as getting his augments to be able to fight, with insane carry potential if you stall out even longer until you have Rabadons. Opt for your E augment first to give you stronger wave clear. Once you have this, you'll be able to nullify the lane phase, instantly clearing out minions and leaving your opponent with no opportunity to trade on you. With such good wave clear, it can be tempting to shove in waves and go for plates, but that can be pretty risky. Unless you know where the enemy jungler is 100%, you should just aim to poke at your opponent under tower with E and walk away, rather than planting yourself there and making yourself an easy gank target. As part of your plan to farm and scale up, communicate with your jungler that you won't be able to fight for scuttle crabs most of the time. And unless your bot lane is a lot stronger early on than the enemy bot lane, even concede the first dragon or two if you have to. It may seem like you're just rolling over and letting the other team have their way, but you'll realize how hard Victor hits once you reach the late game. Moving on down to my favorite place, the bot lane, we're gonna start off with Sivir. When you're playing ADC alone in solo queue, it can be a pretty tough time. Most marksmen, even the strongest carries, need a lot of attention to carry games. If you're tired of dealing with supports that miss every skill shot, sit behind your tower, or just can't stop dying, Sivir gives you a champ to play that nulls interaction in the bot lane with the ability to constantly shove in waves. As you pick up more and more AD, that wave clear also starts to poke your opponent's heart. Even before you're out of lane phase, it reaches the point where landing 1 or 2 Qs does enough damage to send squishier opponents back to base. While Sivir's auto attack range may be pretty low, this hard-hitting poke from Q turns her into an amazing siege champ, as well as giving you strong control around Dragon and Baron. With the ability to poke from so far away, and having Spell Shield to prevent being picked off when you move up to launch your boomerang, you'll be able to chunk opponents out without ever being in danger of throwing the game. Also, unlike other champs who pretty much sacrifice all of their auto attack damage when they go for lethality builds, Sivir still has pretty high damage output with her autos since W gives a pretty huge boost to attack speed for the next 3 hits thanks to her ult's passive. So even when opponents try to get in your face, you can mow them down. Our second pick for bot lane is Ashe. While Sivir was about picking a self-sufficient ADC that could do everything on her own, if you have a bit of faith in your teammates, Ashe is an amazing pick that does well at pretty much all stages of the game. Right off the bat, Ashe is one of the best lane bullies you can play in the lane. Her high range autos, poke from W, and slows on both let you constantly harass your opponents while kiting them back and forth, leaving them unable to do anything. Your hawkshot lets you find out where the enemy jungle is, or at the very least gets an idea of where they may be based on the camps that are up. Once you have your ult, you have the chance to go for all-ins on your opponents, but that's also dependent on how well your support can match that aggression. If you're playing with Zyra or Leona, go for it. But if you're laning with someone like Lulu or Soraka, maybe hold that ult as a defensive cooldown or wait until your jungler pays your lane a visit. Out of lane phase, you'll want to use your ult every time you can, grouping with your team and using it to make picks on the enemy. In this case, a pick doesn't necessarily mean finding an isolated target out trying to ward. If an enemy carry moves even a step too close to your team, throw out your arrow in an attempt to set up your team for an easy kill. Ashe's arrow is a pretty low cooldown. You definitely want to play with the mindset of, you miss every shot you don't take. Worst case scenario, you miss it, and you'll have your ult up anyway relatively soon. For our third pick, we're going with a very specific off-meta pick in Sion as a bot lane carry. This pick is incredibly oppressive when paired with a fasting Senna, and that's pretty much the only time you'll want to play it. Since this video is about champs to main, and this pick hinges on a single specific support, you'll only be able to main this if you have a duo partner to play bot with. Anytime you're pairing a tank with Senna, you need to be more than just a big meatball that takes damage. For example, Mundo and Malphite aren't exactly stellar lane partners for her. They can pretty much be ignored as the enemy bot lane dives past them to kill Senna. The best champs are those that have both CC and damage, and in Sion's case, he has a lot of both. On top of that, his shield gives you a lot of mitigation for the poke you'll be taking from your ranged opponents. As the lane goes on, you'll get tankier and tankier to the point that you practically take no damage. But you're not just here to shrug off their attacks and AFK farm. A full combo from Sion can do a lot of damage, and you'll aim to chain your combo with Senna's to kill your opponents. After level 6, either of you landing your CC is easy enough to bring down any squishy target unlucky enough to be on the receiving end. Aside from the lane you're playing, you'll function like a standard Sion, building full tank, engaging fights for your team, and being a huge disruptive force in teamfights. Our last role to talk about is support, and for that, we'll start off with Sona. While it can be pretty easy to forget she even exists, with most people claiming Seraphine is just the better version, Sona is actually a pretty strong scaling pick for Enchanter players. While she may not have the massive reach and chain CC that Seraphine has, the highly spammable buffs Sona puts out can make a huge difference in late game fights, giving allies much more healing and shielding over time in extended fights. Also, her ult may not have the range that Seraphine does, but it does come out much quicker, meaning you have more windows where you can flash ult opponents than Seraphine, whose longer cast time and slower travel speed leaves opponents with much more room to dodge. All of this isn't to say Sona is outright better than Seraphine or anything, just that she's not dead because Seraphine exists. She's also much lower pick rate and is very rarely banned, so she'll basically never be contested if you decide to main her. If you do decide to roll with Sona, just note that you have to be very cautious in the early stages of the game. Even against other enchanters, being hit by any form of CC usually means you're in danger of dying to an all-in, so sit back and keep trades pretty short. Our second support pick is Rakan. He combines the aspects of both enchanters and engaged supports with the added flair of being extremely mobile and making some of the flashiest plays possible in the game. Early on in lane, unless you're laning with Xayah, you probably won't be better than most other laners in extended fights. You'll keep the trade short, using your E to shield your carry, W to knock up foes, and using E back to your ally before the second cast window expires. If it's not safe to go for fights like that, you can also just play to Q-poke, using your E to dash back to your ADC when your opponents look to retaliate. Your main goal is to survive the lane phase and reach team fights, where you can make those flashy plays I was talking about earlier. While most engaged champs can have their CC dodged, flashed, or otherwise evaded, Rakan's ult gives you the ability to run down foes, charming any you come into contact with. Once you have a few opponents CC'd, aim to W in a spot that allows you to knock up as many as possible. You can use any of Rakan's abilities during his ult, so be sure to be aware of where your teammates are as you're in the team fight. Sometimes, you'll have an ally in the perfect place for your E to dash right through the enemy team. Finishing off our list, we have a pick for you mage support players in Xerath. While Xerath may not provide the shielding, healing, and peeling power of these standard picks, your ADC will still appreciate the super lane dominance that comes with his insane poke. The idea is to throw out Q after Q, whittling down your opponents, pressuring the opposing carry, and punishing them every time you can when they try to CS. If the other bot lane has an engaged support, your W and E help prevent them from ever going in. Just be sure that you're not moving up too far when these abilities are on cooldown. Against enchanters and other low-pressure supports, you can be a lot more aggressive, using Q and W to poke as much as you can with little fear of retaliation, and throwing out E when you have a clear path past the minions to do so. Xerath's support was already a pretty solid pick before this patch, and with him getting a decent buff to his Q poke, you'll be able to transition out of lane phase with even more strength now. Like with any poke mage, you're not well suited to all-in 5v5 fights. With that in mind, vision control is pretty huge for winning the objective game, enabling you to poke out opponents before they can set up and engage fights. And that's it for our top 3 champs to main on 11.9. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to sub so you don't miss out on our meta guides, and you're always in the loop on what the best picks are. Don't forget to let us know which champ you think is really strong, but like in a healthy, balanced way down in the comments below. I do read your comments, so make sure you do that. And another last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description box below, where you can discuss League further or just hang out and be a part of our community. Yay, community! I can't wait to see you guys back for the next video, but until then, don't forget to do some push-ups because it's summertime and it's gonna be hot gamer summer. So, bye!